Before I begin, do feel free to let this video play in the background. There will be gameplay playing if you so choose to watch, but do enjoy my perspective and perhaps select the subscribe button. I mean, you don't have to, but it would be nice. Now, I have played every single 3D Zelda game until the very end, yet none of them have left me wanting more, quite like Breath of the Wild has. Never before have I wanted to explore each and every crevice of the land of Hyrule. Yes, with Breath of the Wild, Eiji Aonuma did away with all of the 3D Zelda tropes and went back to the series' roots. Gone were the days of linear dungeon progression. Instead, the world of Hyrule is one giant dungeon. You are strongly nudged into a story-driven direction, but you don't have to do that. You can explore as much as you want, but one thing I did not mention is, you are dropped into this ginormous field known as the Great Plateau. Perhaps my favorite tutorial area of all time, which at a glance seems to have a much larger overworld compared to the other Zelda games. And then you zoom out, and zoom out, and just one last time, zoom out. And that's when it hits you that this game is fucking huge. It's a giant playground for you to invest countless hours into. The Great Plateau does a great job of introducing first-time players as well as veterans to this game's mechanics and what this game is all about. You're given this ginormous area to explore. You can run, jump, swim, climb, and eventually glide. All of these activities, save for jumping, depletes your stamina bar, which can be increased as you develop throughout the game. Everything is climbable, which means that mountain in the distance? Yeah. You guessed it. This is a new level of immersion that I have not really experienced anywhere else. It's how I feel in the real world when I see a mountain in the distance. I'm like, oh man, I want to go there, but I'm too lazy. Yes, actually that's how dramatic I am in real life. But in this game, I don't have to worry about feeling lazy. Well, that might be because it is a game after all. If only I could inject myself with more stamina like Link does. Instead of dungeons having key dungeon items like in previous Zelda games, they are given to you at the beginning of the game. I like and dislike this change. I like it because this allows the developers to get more creative with the shrines, which is this game's equivalent to dungeons. Do they get more creative though? More on that later. I dislike this change because in previous Zelda games, achieving a dungeon item gave me a sense of reward and progression, which has been replaced with uninteractive passive effects. Again, more on that later. While you are on quests to find the shrines within the Great Plateau and receive the beloved glider, you will eventually come across a shrine within a very cold climate. Once you walk into the area, you will begin to lose hearts. This is the Zelda equivalent to a health bar. There are multiple ways to get around this, such as consuming whatever food you find out in the wild, or, as the game wants you to do, cook cold resistant food. You are introduced to two of the game's core mechanics at the same time. Cooking is completed by finding resources in the wild and combining them together. You can get really specific with what you want to make. This is great because you're rewarded with yet another mechanic as you traverse the snowy mountains. Gear with passive effects. Yes, for figuring out how to make Link smile, and I mean seriously, the only time he shows emotion is when he cooks food. You're rewarded with a warm doublet, so you don't have to worry about running out of heat-resistant food. But what are passive effects? These are items that will give Link temporary stat boosts as long as he is wearing some sort of clothing. As you may have guessed, the warm doublet does indeed give you a heat resistance level of 1. In previous Zelda games, the only incentive available for going out of your way to find a chest is to potentially find a piece of heart or large sum of rupees. However, Breath of the Wild rectifies that oh so beautifully. Now you can find pieces of clothing, shields, and weaponry. Speaking of which, the combat system. While traversing throughout Hyrule, you will come across a plethora of different weapons to use. Bows, elemental staffs, spears, swords, dual-wielded swords, and random utility items such as brooms and mops. This is a refreshing change to the usual one-handed sword and shield. I absolutely adore the amount of customization available in this game. I personally lean towards using the spears. I like the high DPS and distance it provides, but there's one thing that pissed me off to no end. Whoa, something that pisses off the almighty Degenerate? What is it, master? Just as I'm about to get accustomed to using a weapon, it shatters into atoms. So with such a variety of weapons available for the player, it would be a shame to not be able to make use of them all, right? So I fully respect and encourage the usage of a durability system. After a while, the weapons should break, but it's not after a while, it's after a very short amount of swings. And it sucks. It sucks so much. I'm keeping my cool and rare weapons in my inventory for a sick fight that may come my way, but guess what? Enemy variety is also weak as hell. It seems most of the time I'm fighting the same retarded moblins and Lizalfos everywhere I go, picking up their remains for elixirs I'm never going to make. Is that another bokoblin I see? Better abuse my time control and give myself a guaranteed headshot. Why can I slow down time? Visually, it's fantastic, but it's insanely broken. I will admit, the enemies do scale with progression, but it does not stop me from giving them what seems to be endless amount of headshots until they die. From jumping off your horse to getting a lucky dodge counter. I wish it was consistent enough for me to not poke fun at it, but unfortunately, I'm simply unaware of what makes the Flurry Rush work. This game wants you to hold the L button and then dodge in a specific direction, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Confusing, to say the least. But when it does hit, it's mostly a guaranteed one-shot. Sadly, this makes combat very simple in a game that has so much content to explore. I suppose they tried to make combat easier for all of those bloody newcomers, because in previous Zelda games, combat was becoming all kinds of whack. Anyway, in each shrine you find within the Great Plateau, you will be introduced to the items that all future shrines will be based on throughout the game. Bombs, magnesis, stasis, and cryonis. These can all be upgraded later in the game. So instead of gradually growing your arsenal of utility, you'll have the same moveset for the entire game. I'm fine with this. It's a new approach and I appreciate the risk. There are endless uses for each application that appears on your Sheikah slate. Although they do go on cooldown, which gets lowered once you upgrade them, they allow for very versatile play. As you may have guessed, bombs do indeed make things go boom. Magnesis is, as the name implies, it's a magnet. You can do some cool tricks such as use it to lift and drop metal boxes as a weapon. Stasis alone unlocks so many more movement options. With this app, you're able to freeze an object in time and apply as much force as you can before the object goes flying. Cryonis allows you to create giant ice pillars in water, essentially giving you the power to infinitely walk over water. This one is perhaps my personal favorite. It's just so cool to ignore the ocean and travel as much as you want. At times, I even find myself using the ice blocks as a shield during combat. Thanks, Nintendo. Very cool. But what is the Sheikah Slate, you say? It is essentially a tablet that Princess Zelda used to own. More on that later. So the tutorial area is now complete and you're tasked to go and meet the old man that's been guiding you this entire time in a familiar relic of the past. This is where you will receive my personal favorite item, the item that makes exploring oh so much more enjoyable, the paraglider. Yes, you are gifted the ability to fly. Who wouldn't want this? It's great. Well, obviously you unlock the rest of the map to explore in any way you desire, but doing so is so fucking satisfying. From here on out, I'm going to talk about my personal discoveries and experiences in the land of Hyrule. So let's begin. When you receive your paraglider, you are also nudged into the direction known as East. This is where you will find your first horse stable, NPCs, and shrines. I went this way because I was like, why not? I could go west and discover the desert, but I've been trying to pay more attention to story in games, so I decided to go forward with the game's recommendation. So I headed towards Twin Mountains or some shit, tamed some slick as fuck horse, spoke to some sick cunts, and I made my way towards Kakariko village. I did try to explore, but because I lacked stamina to climb a mountain, I ended up just following the game's recommendation and going to Kakariko village. But what is this stamina I speak of and how do I get more of it? Well, my little noobs, Nintendo finally realized that constantly forcing Link to roll and having to hear his agonizing screams was not a good look for Nintendo in 2017. Or shall I say in 2011 when Skyward Sword introduced us to the stamina meter for the first time. But in that game, you could not upgrade your stamina bar. So you mean to tell me that you can increase your stamina bar in Breath of the Wild? Why, Yes! Remember those shrine thingies I mentioned a while back? They give you these things called spirit orbs. Essentially this game's edition of a piece of heart from the previous Zelda games. Once you collect 4 of them, you can trade them in with the goddess of Hyrule for either a piece of heart or a stamina vessel. I personally stacked those stamina vessels up so I could just spend more time exploring much more comfortably. I did not get an extra heart piece until I beat the first dungeon. It's nice to have the option to choose between extra stamina or health. It makes free heart runs even more convenient. I don't have to scour around avoiding chests in case they have a piece of heart. Honestly, a great change, and I haven't even touched upon my favorite system upgrade yet. If you go to Hateno village, you'll find what appears to be a very dark stone. This is where you can trade already obtained stamina or heart containers for each other, or trade them in for money and use the stone as a bank of some sorts. Having this option in the game allows for sweatlords such as myself to manage my heart stamina points so I can unlock some juicy content when need be. Or if I just want to challenge myself, I can. In previous Zelda games, once you got a new heart container, that was it. You were stuck with it for life. Save, file, ruined. So anyway, you will find many more horse stables across Hyrule, which are also accompanied by their own shrine, which double as an easy teleport to get around the map. After the first few stables, that song will become oh so tiresome. This game really pushes the wild aspect of the game, because instead of simply just giving us a horse like they do in the other games, we have to go and tame one ourselves. That's pretty cool. Horses come in all kinds of colors and statistics, so pick one you like. For consistency's sake, I named my horse Horse. Really funny at this point, isn't it? One of my favorite aspects about this game begins at this very moment. It's a subtle touch, but makes the world feel so much more alive. Yes, from now on you will be able to meet other travelers along the pathways. Some of them will have little to say and some of them try to sell you things. It's fun to see how the after effects of Calamity Ganon is still affecting Hyrule's society. Also, yes, I have indeed realized that I have yet to talk about the story and the setting. Well, this is the perfect time to do so, because after I got my horse, I went directly to Kakariko village and was bombarded with some juicy lore. As the title of the game implies, you are like a breath of fresh air for the land of Hyrule and its people. You traverse throughout the wild and gather materials for sustenance. You wake up 100 years after what seems to be like never-ending turmoil. Memories are slowly recollected as you progress throughout the game. You find out you have to infiltrate and conquer 4 divine beasts in order to defeat the twisted Calamity Ganon that plagued the land of Hyrule all of those years ago. At this point, you are given 4 options. Each one of these options is at a different corner of the map. In the northeast, you will find the Goron. Just south of that, you will find the Zora. West of that is the Gerudo. And finally, in the northwest portion of the map, you will find the Rito. These are all races or species within the Zelda universe. You can go to any one of these locations in any order you like, yet you are heavily nudged towards the Zora Divine Beast, which is actually what I went for. Exploring this first area was beautiful. Being able to run through a swampish marshland was exhilarating. It was at this point that the map truly opened up. What I was looking at felt so much larger than what was in front of me. Again, there are a few NPCs around that try to push you into the right direction. I was like, sure, why not? Let's see what's going on in the land of blue fish. It seems this mechanical elephant is pissed, so it's endlessly raining around here. Calamity Ganon's dark magic has somewhat poisoned or corrupted the divine beast, which in turn is creating great discomfort for the local villagers. Could you imagine 24/7 rain while having to listen to constant elephant battle cries, I suppose? Sounds kind of relaxing actually, but I like how the story has an effect on the locations. Once you eventually conquer a divine beast, the environmental issues are gone. If only it were that simple. It makes sticking to the story and not endlessly exploring somewhat rewarding, since all of the NPCs become so much more joyful. Anyway, what's nice about the Zora Divine Beast is that it also somewhat gives you a tutorial for what I personally consider to be the most difficult mini-boss in Breath of the Wild, the Lino. Now, do I mean to tell you that they've moved mini-bosses from dungeons and spread them out throughout the overworld? Why, yes! Man, these guys suck! The game wants you to collect shock arrows to take down the elephant's defense system or something. And man, does this guy give you a hard time. It took me a few tries to finally take him down. He ran me down faster than Stanley on Pretzel Day. Ha! But damn, was it rewarding. New weapons and shields to make up for all of the weapons that broke trying to fight him. I will be honest, unless I'm in the mood to be challenged, I avoid these mini bosses in the same way people cross the street when they see me walking towards them. Terrified and helpless. The rewards for taking one of these beasts down is just not worth the amount of weapons you have to expend along with the time. Now is the time to express my thoughts regarding the so-called dungeons. This is the part I've been looking forward to the most. In previous Zelda games, there were about 7 dungeons each game. Usually, this is where all of that juicy mind-boggling puzzle solving is. You beat a mini-boss, get a new item, and the rest of the dungeon will typically revolve around the usage of said item. In this game, however, the dungeons are complete and utter doo-doo. Not only are there only 4 of them, they are incredibly simple, short, and empty. All 4 of them are structured the same. You get in, find the map, alter some mechanics of the beast, usually rotations of some sort, and then finish off with an effortlessly defeated boss. There are barely any enemies to take down. The puzzles are overly simple and take mere seconds to complete. Dungeons are one of the few gameplay elements the Zelda team somewhat carried over from the previous Zelda games. And man, did they just not try. It does not help that the best dungeon of the 4 is the dungeon that the game heavily pushes you towards. Yes, the Zora dungeon is actually the most entertaining and complex of the 4. Everything after this was just a major disappointment. Have you ever heard of the phrase, what is it? The journey is greater than the destination? Something like that, you know what I mean. That's this game in a nutshell. I spend all of my time looking for sweet and sexy views, shrines, and interesting locations. There's a sense of freedom in Breath of the Wild that other games have yet to capture. It doesn't feel like I'm on a set path. I can do what I want, when I want, at however pace. And there will always be something for me to do. After I cleared the Zora Divine Beast, I ventured off to explore the east side of the map. At this point, the game stopped pushing me in directions, and suddenly I began to feel a whole lot more lonelier. You see, unlike previous Zelda games, there is not a companion to follow you around and point you in the right direction. There is no right direction! Just you, your items, and the land of Hyrule. It's quite refreshing. I never felt the need to have a companion. They always seem to hold my hand a bit too much. Why do I need the game telling me where to go? I have 2 eyes, arms, and ears. I could potentially, maybe perhaps, figure it out on my own? Just an idea. I headed to Hateno village. I heard about some item upgrades, so I wanted that shit ASAP. While I was there, I noticed a giant sea of water and gasped. I flew there instantaneously. I wanted to explore everything, spamming Cryonis to cross the ocean till I'm finally rewarded with a shrine to complete. I found myself enjoying the journey much more than the destination when it came to shrines. Most of the shrines ended up being quite lackluster. Some of them had some really intriguing puzzles, but most of the time they were incredibly short. There is a decent variety when it comes to shrines. Some of them will have you fight a mini guardian, which gets very repetitive very fast. And some other shrines will have you use the gyro controls to figure out some quote-unquote puzzle. These are the ones I detest the most. The gyro controls to me just did not feel intuitive enough. Time after time, my so-called control would frustratingly throw a ball off the map. I could have done without this. Nonetheless, they did come across as challenging, but it was the wrong kind of difficulty. When the controls are the most difficult part about the game, you've done it wrong. The puzzle should have me mentally stimulated, not infuriatingly fed up. Some of these other puzzles are just too damn short. Sometimes the dev team comes up with a brilliant idea only for it to end way too quickly. I suppose this is done for the sake of pacing. I mean, did they want us to randomly stumble upon a shrine to then play a 40-minute puzzle and break up the immersion of exploring the vast world of Hyrule? I suppose not. So from that perspective, I do understand the gameplay philosophy of short and sweet shrines spread throughout the map instead of the elongated dungeons we used to get. However, the shrines that bother me just as much are the shrines that are there for the sake of padding out the game, essentially filler episodes. Yes, these are the shrines that seem to be copy and pasting the same task in order to test your strength. A major minor test of strength? Please, I can stop time at will. And with max stamina, you will feel my wrath. It's even more insulting when the shrines are empty. Bruh. Reused assets are one thing, but at least give me something to do other than find the shrine. Maybe the devs thought players would get frustrated if we spent oh so long to find the shrine, only for us to actually play the game and solve some puzzles. Crazy. There were a few instances where this actually happened, although the only one I can remember right now is the shrine in the Gerudo Highlands that required me to melt some ice in order to gain access to the shrine, and then solve some ice challenge. This was a good shrine, and as you can see, it was obviously one of the more memorable ones. A few other shrines I could remember were honestly more obscure and confusing than anything else. I ended up looking up the answers on YouTube because what are these patterns? What are these patterns on the wall trying to tell me? This is where I felt the devs went too far. I don't want to learn Braille to unlock more content like he did with the Regis from Gen 3 of Pokemon. It's not mentally stimulating to me, nor is it entertaining. If there is one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that short and concise shrines that take the extra step towards complexity is probably the sweet point that Nintendo should want to take for Breath of the Wild 2. It seems to me that Nintendo did a lot of experimenting with this game, from the variety of shrines to the lackluster dungeons and the absurd amount of Korok seeds available throughout the game. But what are these Korok seeds you speak of? Good question. Korok seeds are little tiny tasks you can complete throughout the overworld that are stacked as points you can trade in for inventory upgrades. Usually, these tasks go as far as looking under a rock on top of a mountain or shooting some balloons. This is yet another fantastic incentive to push people like me into exploring the overworld. There are so many cool weapons and shields in this game that you want to carry all of them, but unfortunately, I find myself to just not. So what do you have to do? Trade a weapon or find all 900 Korok seeds? Yes, you heard me right. There are over 900 of these things. I can tell the developers had a really good time with this one. Sometimes you really have to think outside of the box to find these things. Honestly, I don't know why they didn't just go for a cool 1000. Once you trade them in, you also get a very cute dance. You can skip this, but I never do it. The song is kinda catchy. I spent a few good days exploring the eastern side of the map. I climbed Mount Lanayru only to find the mythical dragon in pain. I then went from Akala to Lorelin village and finally towards Death Mountain. This is where I defeated my second divine beast of choice, and unfortunately, this one was the weakest. Well, to be honest, they're also forgettable that they have somewhat blurred into one faded image for me. There are no differences between any of them. If there are, it's very subtle. The shrines are more memorable than this. I'll just tell you now. I explored the map in an anti-clockwise motion starting from southeast. So this means after the Goron Divine Beast, I completed the Rita one and finished off with the Gerudo Beast. These unfortunately broke the immersion of the game along with the pacing of exploring the overworld. Which leads me to ask, why exactly is this a Zelda game? The best part about the previous Zelda games, the main attraction, is somewhat overlooked in Breath of the Wild. Other than shrines, the Divine Beasts are the only other pieces of the map that are separated from the overworld, introducing loading screens and areas that you can't return to once you've completed them. As I said at the beginning of the video, the entire game or overworld is one giant dungeon anyway. So while I wish they would have fleshed out these dungeons a lot more, it will probably be better to omit them altogether from Breath of the Wild 2. After defeating the Goron Divine Beast, I ventured west to find the Lost Woods, which led me to the Master Sword. This is my favorite integration of the Master Sword. In Ocarina of Time, it was used as a means of time travel. Since then, it's somewhat just been a plot device. Well, in this game, you can discover the Master Sword literally as soon as you leave the Great Plateau. There's just one thing. There is the requirement of a minimum of 13 yards to actually pull the Master Sword out of the pedestal. Remember that trading system I mentioned earlier? Yeah, this is where it came in handy for me. The Master Sword is the weapon I use the most. Since it never breaks, I don't have to worry about wasting or losing my rare weapons. It also acts as a projectile at max health. This is an elegant weapon for a more civilized game. It's nice to be rewarded for seeking out shrines. You need to complete a minimum of 40 shrines to have 13 hearts. It's also great that this time around, I randomly stumbled upon the Master Sword instead of being pushed towards it. Usually you are rewarded with a rare weapon in the shrine, or even, gasp, dare I say it, gear changes. Yes, I am finally going to talk about my real favorite upgrade to the series. Gear with stats. And passive effects and upgrades. I briefly touched upon it earlier, but before, you had a few clothing items that would give some small passive effects. And now, Nintendo really went all out with this. I never in my life figured that one of my favorite aspects about a Zelda game would be the option to change my clothes. You can change the head, chest, or leg piece, and if you have a full set, you will obtain a passive effect too. To even get a clothing piece, you either need to find it in a shrine or buy it from a store. This, and perhaps arrows, are the only thing I spend my rupees on, and damn is it worth it. I love mixing and matching my armor with my weapons, creating outfits to fit the overall aesthetic I'm looking for. Switching to different armor pieces depending on the situation creates a more engaging experience. Actively thinking about not only what weapon and shield I'm wielding, but my armor too is immersive as hell. The first time I got hit by a lightning strike, I realized it was because, metal. Being forced to mix and match my gear based on the environment is a brilliant touch that I wish more games would take advantage of. It gets even better once you can start upgrading them at the fairy fountains. Giving the random materials you find around the world more purpose is genius. Yes, to upgrade clothing you need random artifacts that can be found around the world of Hyrule. So collecting garbage drops actually has its uses outside of cooking. Isn't that nice? Leveling up your gear doesn't unlock much except for some tankiness and maybe passive effects. It's still good to do, cause some of these guys hit really hard. So the sense of progression is somewhat validated and feels natural. There is power scaling, although I won't go into that. There are other videos that will go into much more detail than I would on the topic, so go check that out. Finally, after battling what seems to be an endless amount of guardians, even teleporting out to buy some ancient arrows, I made it to the gates of Hyrule Castle, only to find out that it does not even open. No matter, I simply walked around it and I noticed I had a few options. I could take the path in front of me that leads up a hill towards the castle, or I could drop below and glide towards the cave I saw in the distance. Naturally, being the curious pussycat that I am, I took the lower route instead of the higher route, and boy was it rewarding. I was getting to the point where maybe, just maybe, they actually omitted the Hylian shield from the game. But no, I beat this mini boss for the millionth time, and I was rewarded with, you guessed it, the Hylian shield. It was at this moment that I realized that Hyrule Castle is a more traditional Zelda dungeon. Defeat a mini boss and get a gear upgrade for it? How nostalgic. There isn't any gear shifting mechanics like there were for the Divine Beast. There are two versions of Hyrule Castle's theme playing. One plays when you're indoors and the other plays when you're outdoors. It's cool. A bit unnecessary, but cool. Hyrule Castle is unsettling. I love how there's so much to explore and the entire castle is riddled with lore. The entire thematic of Hyrule Castle is devastating. It feels as though even when the sun shines through, it always gives off this final hours vibe. There are guardians everywhere, ready to gun you down at a moment's notice. I actually had to leave and come back with ancient arrows. Along with the guardians, the place is littered with mini bosses, Lionel after Lionel, back to back, running me down and making me consume all of my food. And finally being tested on everything I've learned up until this point. There are so many different paths to take, it's confusing. Exploring the castle for new pathways is just as rewarding as anywhere else. Needless to say, I was eager to finally face Ganon. Perhaps that's why it felt so underwhelming. Ganon was incredibly linear. The Lionels always gave me a much harder time. They were smacking me up literally just moments before. This iteration of Ganon is incredibly boring. I miss the old Ganon. The Ganon from Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. The masterful tactician. Not this mindless beast. It just doesn't feel as satisfying to defeat Ganon when he's missing so much of what made Ganondorf interesting to me. Oh well, it seems as though the tactician will finally make his return in Breath of the Wild 2. How exciting is that? Being that this is a Zelda game, we finally beat the game. We're sent back to just before Ganon is defeated and are welcome to explore the world just as we did before. It's kind of sad, to be honest. We're blocked from moving past this endless purgatory of Calamity Ganon's wrath. We'll never see the NPCs move on from this torture. No matter how many times I kill Ganon, he never truly disappears. I understand, since the entire world and premise revolves around this one event, the devs would have to completely change the entire world's interactions with everything, and might as well just make a new game at that point. Well, that's everything, right? There is the recollection of memories and all of the side quests I somewhat ignored. I don't know. I did a few of the side quests early on, but most of the time the rewards were just as mundane as the tasks. Food that recovers like 2 hearts, please. I would rather just help the poor stragglers that are getting run down by enemies on the side of the road that also give food. I will say this though, the shrine quests are perhaps the most enjoyable out of all of the side quests. Yes, I guess it would have been a piss take if they had even more puzzles for me to complete after solving their riddles and whatnot. Perhaps the biggest letdown were the dragons towering over the map. I thought there were going to be some dope side stories involving them. Not really. You just shoot them with an arrow every now and then to get some scales or horns, and you can use these in elixirs to upgrade some gear. I felt like there was supposed to be something more to these beautiful dragons. They even have their own theme song. It's a shame that idea most likely got scrapped. Collecting all of the memories unlocks the true ending, which is where I assume Breath of the Wild 2 is going to pick up. I do wonder, how did Zelda and all of these characters live for over 100 years? What on earth is the life expectancy in Hyrule? Maybe it's that dope hidden town of Lorelei. If I lived there, I would probably live past 100 too. Goddamn, have you ever seen an aesthetic so visually pleasing to the eyes? Not only that, but the music absolutely slaps. It's a simple town, but it does the trick. This is absolutely my favorite location in Breath of the Wild. Gerudo Desert can just miss me with that shit, man. It felt so rewarding to stumble upon this town and just chill. The rest of Hyrule seems to be so devastatingly terrifying all of the time, especially Hyrule Field. That place is littered with guardians and mini bosses. It ain't the same place it was back in Ocarina of Time. But I suppose it makes sense that the place closest to Calamity Ganon would have the most difficult enemies hanging around. Breath of the Wild is more than just a story. It's a full-on adventure. I mean, the story is as bare bones as it gets. You are literally dropped into this world and are told, go. Just talking about it is making me want to start a new playthrough, but explore the overworld in a new direction. No experience is the same. The grass was treaded on, the mountains were climbed, and the water was flown over. This game has stolen the slot for my favorite Zelda game, which actually I could honestly never decide on a single favorite Zelda game before because I love them all so much. Thank you for watching. It's you. Hi, it's me actually. I'm the internet degenerate. I'm sure you might remember me. I know it's been a while, but I'm here now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Obviously, if you made it to this point, you clearly did. I probably will be going forward with long-form media discussion from now on instead of the intense, short video essays that I was doing before. So, hopefully you enjoy that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.